The reason we've got two stages, ladies and gentlemen, is because of the workshop sessions later on, because this room will divide. I'll explain that later on. Consumer confidence can fluctuate. Mine certainly has done. I saw our financial advisor last week, and he assured me that I have enough money to live in luxury for the rest of my life, so long as I die next Thursday, which is not very reassuring at all. Now we're going to have, we really have got the best possible experts in everything here, haven't we? Aren't we blessed? So we welcome to the stage now Kate Nicholls. We don't really need to explain who she is, Chief Executive of UKHospitality, and she is going to be interviewed by another towering figure in our industry, the editor of the Caterer, James Stagg. So please welcome James and Kate to the stage.
Hi, Kate.
Hello. Where do you want us to go?
You can go there. Good morning. We've heard about Donald Duck, and we've had Peter Pan and Harry Potter. I was expecting the big James Bond build-up. You really let me down, Peter Hancock, but there we go. So I'm here with Kate Nicholls, as Peter said. We're discussing the new normal, 2024 and beyond. And there's plenty to discuss with new government making changes to apprenticeships, employment rights and business rates. But let's start with a bit of business that's probably front of mind now. That we just had the budget, the dust has settled. Probably the biggest talking point in meeting rooms around the country has been NI.
Yes.
What's your take on that?
Look, we all knew, and we'd had the pitch rolled quite a lot by the Chancellor and Keir Starmer. I think that's probably why, as Thomas's slide showed, the misery index, consumer confidence, business confidence had tanked, because over the summer they prepared us for the fact that there was a big black hole. They needed to do lots of work to repair the public finances. Excuse me. And I think also, it was quite clear that employers' NIC was in their sights. They had, just before the budget, they had their big investment summit. They announced at the investment summit that they were looking at employers' NI. So you don't tank your own investment summit and knock the headlines off that if it isn't something that's serious. So we'd done a lot of forecasting. We'd done a lot of engagement with them before that around employer NI. We tried our hardest to be able to explain to them that it's not cumulative, that it has a disproportionate impact on certain workers, that there isn't a lower rate, unlike income tax, and that they went ahead and did it anyway. I think it was the shock in the budget was not the rate, it was the fact that you changed the threshold. And for our sector in particular, and particularly hotels where you've got a large volume of part-time staff, lower paid staff, events people coming in and out, and those people who have atypical work patterns, it's about 5 times more impactful, the change in the threshold, than it is on the rate. And we're doing our best to be able to communicate that to them, but I simply don't think they've done the sectoral analysis and the impact assessment to be able to look seriously at what that change would do, and I don't think they'd factored in how impactful it would be changing the threshold as well as the rate.
So obviously it affects businesses, every business across the country pretty much, but it's
does.
possible to argue that hospitality is greater impact on hospitality.
Yeah, well, I would always argue that there's a greater impact in hospitality. This time round, it happens to be true. I mean, there's a greater impact on hospitality because most of our businesses, the vast majority of our businesses, have not yet fully recovered from COVID. Political audiences tend to have short memories. They've forgotten. COVID seems a long time ago for them. We've got long economic COVID. We've still got large amounts of debt. The balance sheets haven't been repaired. A third of the sector is operating at or below break even. And over the course of the time since COVID, you've had margins eroded by around 40%. So there isn't any slack for an economic shock. And then on top of that, it's a heck of an economic shock. And I just don't think they'd fully appreciated the fact that if you've got somebody working in our sector 20 hours a week, the tax increase for them on the jobs tax is 75%. If you're a higher earner, yes, it's the rate, and yes, there is an impact on the threshold, but it's been brought in for the first time. So you were able to work probably 4 short shifts in our sector before you hit that tax threshold. You're now effectively working 1 or 2. And it does mean that you take out those lower earning, lower hours, shifts to be able to make ends meet. 85% of our businesses have said they're going to cut hours for staff and jobs. 95% have said they're going to take a hit on investment. They've just completely frozen it, which obviously has a broader, bigger economic impact too. And 99% say they're going to have to pass on in some form of price.
So if I read that right, you're saying that people will probably actually employ people for longer hours because the shorter, you wouldn't have temporary workers because it's actually more expensive.
Those are the roles that you would look at automating or taking out, or you might change your opening hours so you've taken out an entire shift and you ask people to work for longer shifts, but they're also, you're not having that smaller volume. And that means you're disproportionately hitting those workers that Thomas highlighted that are economically inactive, looking for routes back. If you're furthest from the jobs market, you want a small number of hours to ease yourself back in. NI is not cumulative. It's not like income tax. It's from the first pound that you start earning, you start paying. So there isn't that ratcheting up. And if you've got people who are sick, who've got caring responsibilities, which was the other bit of the slide, people who are looking after caring at both ends of the spectrum, older parents, younger children, they want to work those flexible hours. And this will be a damaging impact. So you will reduce those employment opportunities.
And what's the reaction in government when you raised this since?
I think that they were quite taken aback at the level of concern that was expressed almost immediately. I think we were one of the first industry leads or sector leads, I don't mean in our sector, but across the economy, to fully appreciate what that tilt in the threshold was going to do and to flag it and sort of go in. I went in straight away to number 11, number 10, DBT to be able to raise it and talk about the impact and try and put it in real world terms, because you can talk about £3.4 billion worth of extra tax, but to try and make sure that people understand what that means to an average individual family business or a small pub operator or an independent hotel, and the impact that you're going to have and the decisions that you're going to take. I think they were taken aback, they're digesting that, and they're looking at what else they can do. I wouldn't put it any more firm than that, no. But
Okay. Right. Well, let's move on from that anyway. And there's a slight upside in business rates relief. What's your take on this? I mean, I'm looking for upsides, but obviously it's not great for SMEs. It's slightly better, perhaps.
It's tough for SMEs because obviously what you've got is the relief that's come down from 75,000 to 40,000, but that was capped at 110,000 per business over a 3-year period. So actually you've got a law of diminishing returns where fewer and fewer people within the industry were getting the benefit of that. The plus side is they are legislating for root and branch reform, and they're going to introduce a permanent lower hospitality multiplier from April 2026. The legislation is just starting to be put together and they're consulting on that, so that is in train. It's not something that will be decided in 2026 and could be knocked off on track. It's in train. They are looking at 2 new multipliers for businesses that are in the hospitality sector with a rateable value of less than 51,000 to 499,000. And then the big question is, what do you do for businesses 500,000 plus? But at the moment, they're looking at 20 to 30p discounts on the current multipliers. So that brings a hospitality multiplier down to around 30, 35p in the pound instead of 53. We need to work hard on the upper end because that's where you've got lots of the hotels sitting, and we need to make sure we've got a lower multiplier there as well. But it's going to be paid for by a higher rate of multiplier on Amazon warehouses. So it is about redressing the balance, bricks and mortar to clicks and mortar.
So it is going in the right direction at least? It's
going in the right direction. We've got to make them understand that smaller businesses are not the be-all and end-all. Yeah. Small businesses are great, but I've never met a small business that doesn't want to grow. And in our sector, lots of small businesses are outside the definition of an SME because they employ more than 50 people. So we need a definition that works for hospitality. And crucially, a small independent hospitality business can operate from a very big premises. So it's moving in the right direction, lots to get right. And the good thing is that because they've got it wrong on NICs and they feel the pain of the media campaign, and we need to keep the pressure on so that they change their mind, they are more likely to look at better solutions for us in those other parts. So we can look forward to a proper, better business rates regime.
I mean, there was quite a sort of a reaction, once when the budget happened, there was quite a reaction amongst the operators that I spoke to, people saying they'll be freezing recruitment for a while, you know, taking a look at everything. Obviously, Mark from BDO was saying we need to talk up the sector and encourage recruitment and what have you. But actually, how do we do that when these perhaps unintended consequences are happening?
It's tough, and it's a tightrope that I walk all the time, because I can go out and it's very easy. Journalists report bad news. Journalists, I mean, apart from our lovely sector journalists.
I don't know about that.
But
We've got our figures, you read the bad news. So,
bad news sells.
Yeah.
You know, you get much more as a click or as a sort of sell in a newspaper if you've got those kind of stories. The balance to that is, who wants to invest or start to work in a sector that is constantly under threat, having problems, might not have the headroom to be able to invest. So it is a difficult task, and it's why we've started to frame all of our discussions about the impact of government policy on what it does for workers' choices rather than businesses, so that we can start to talk up the fact that we want to invest in our people, we want to be doing more to be able to train them, to reward them, to pay them properly, to have progressions. And I think that's where you can flip into that. The apprenticeship levy reform also gives us an opportunity to talk positively about careers and roles in the sector. The government's investment strategy and industrial strategy talks about us being the foundation economy, the everyday economy where most people work, live, play. And again, that gives us a positive framework to be able to talk about that. But we do need to talk about the positives of recruitment and the positives of jobs.
And on that, actually, you mentioned apprenticeships. So the government introducing a growth and skills levy instead of the apprenticeship levy. Details still relatively light, but what changes does the sector want to see?
Well, I think what we've heard from government is that they will probably allow 40 to 50% of the apprenticeship levy funds to be used for non-apprenticeships. Particularly, they want to use them for pre-apprenticeships and skills training that sort of on-roads you onto a higher level and takes you off, so digital leadership. What we need to work hard as an industry is and we have a problem, we don't have common, agreed, accredited standards of training and qualifications that go from entry level up. So it's fine once you get to graduate and degrees and postgraduate, there is recognised qualifications there, but there isn't common transferable skills. And that means we need to work harder than lots of other sectors to make sure that the guardrails the government is going to put on the spend of that 40% of the levy that can be used for training is used on the training that we want. I think the last time I was here, I was talking about the fact we were working at UKHospitality on a common entry-level standard of training. We've worked that up. We've piloted it with DWP. It's 90 days of common training as the basics that can be done in situ, in venue, or with Springboard in a sort of pre-apprenticeship work stream. It can be done by DWP in a sector-based work academy, but the key point is it's accredited and recognised by the industry, so then it's transferable. So somebody coming through a coffee shop or a local pub could then go and work in a Hilton or a branded restaurant and have that common training recognised as going through. So we're working on that because I think that'll be really exciting. Over and above that, we want to enhance that so it becomes a very fast-track foundational apprenticeship. At the moment, you can't do a level 1, level 2 apprenticeship if you've already got 50% of the training that you've had already, and you can't do it unless it lasts for a year. And actually what we need to do is consolidate that training into a pre-apprenticeship, pre-level 3 apprenticeship, and make sure that people can do that fast track and it doesn't then debar them from going on to the higher level apprenticeships. There's things like that. And then finally on apprenticeships, it's about making it fit for purpose for seasonal businesses so that they can be transferable. If somebody moves employer in the middle of their apprenticeship, that they can port it across more readily, and then we can bring in the SMEs within the sector as well to benefit from that. So there's a lot of work to be done. Sandra, who is our skills director at UKHospitality, is doing a fantastic amount of work to map across that training and really fill the gap in our industry, because nobody at the moment in any of those professional standards looks at people who've coming out at 16, 18 with no training, no qualifications, and then takes it through to the management.
And how about employing it for older people as well? Sort of, we talk about over 50s and what have you, and actually using some of that training budget for other older members of your staff, or bringing people back into the workplace.
There is no age restriction on the use of the apprenticeship levy now or the training budget. It won't be directed and skewed at younger people. It does open it up. The other thing that we are talking to them about on the NICs is, at the moment, if you take on an apprentice and they're under 24, they're exempt from NIs. We should be applying that to other people, other demographics, older workers and returners to work. Over 50s women are the fastest growing segment of employment in the sector.
Excellent. Okay. And staying on employment, one area of the employment bill is the use of 0 hours contracts, which is still used in hospitality. And people do use it and people do want it as well. I mean, Are they going to be scrapped, or is it a bit more nuanced than that?
They're not going to be scrapped. I mean, the team back at UKHospitality has done a fantastic amount of work with the Labour Party in opposition and over the summer in the transition period. Alan, our Deputy Chief Executive, and myself have been in those roundtable closed meetings with ministers to be able to try and get some sensible, pragmatic changes, and we have succeeded in doing so. The main one is there is no ban on 0 hours contracts. What you will do is come out at the end of a reference period to be determined, and we're pushing for it to be at least 24 weeks to take account of seasonal workers. Anybody who's employed for less than that, by the way, is just exempt from the legislation, and so temporary contracts you can just have as whatever hours you want. But if people are on permanent contracts, at the end of that reference period, it will look at assessing the average hours that people are worked, and then people will have a choice to remain on 0 hours contracts. And 90% of our workers say they want to remain on a 0 hours contract. The key point is when you come back, and if you do get that guaranteed hours, or if you do want it, if it comes out at the right thing for you as the worker, that's a negotiation with the employer. But the employee has then lost their right to refuse a shift. So, you know, people forget that 0 hours contracts have rights and responsibilities both ways. If you take that away, then you can be required to come in and work those hours.
Interesting. Okay, great. I have a few more questions for Kate, but I will open it up to the audience. So just formulate the questions in your head for the next couple of minutes, and while we carry on. There's also proposals to remove unnecessary restrictions on union activity in the workplace. Now, how might operators be impacted by increased union activity, do you think?
I don't think they'll be impacted by that particular piece of regulation, which is sort of removing restrictions. But I do think there's a big watch out around trade union recognition. And again, the proposals for that are very vague. We're not going to see the details of that until 2026. I think most of those changes will take time to come through. But there are enhanced recognition rights, enhanced rights to access to trade unions coming into a workplace. That's trade union representatives coming to meet workers. And that's obviously causes consternation, so we need to make sure that they're tightly circumscribed. And more importantly, the trade union recognition, we really need to make sure that there are sensible thresholds, that you've got to have a majority of the employees in a workplace and question, is it a site or is it a company? Can you box and cox that to make sure it's the right one? But there is a big watch out there, and we're alert and on the case.
Of course. And we're covering a lot of ground here.
It's okay. We can cover all sorts.
Okay, I'm going to go on to tipping now. New legislation's in place. This has obviously been widely accepted. But do you see any examples of operators not complying or still being a bit unsure? And do you think there'll be any examples made of businesses?
I think the enforcement regime, they've talked about education and facilitation and support rather than enforcement straight away. The ultimate enforcement, if you operate a trunk, is obviously HMRC, which is a big issue. And that's one of the things we've said continually to government, that this is already highly regulated. You don't need any more in the space. The enforcement effectively comes through ACAS and an individual complaint. So it's workers who are asking for what's happening. So far, we haven't touched wood. Can't see any wood. Touch wood. We haven't seen any issues that have come up in terms of compliance. I've had a couple of cases that people have talked about on Twitter, or anecdotal issues, and when you scrape below the surface, it's totally compliant. There isn't a problem, but it's a complex issue, and customers are not clear about it. So I think it is working hard, I would say, from an operator perspective, to make sure there's really good, transparent communications with your team about how they are getting their tips and how they are being shared, because most of it is false assumptions, and a lot of it is generated by front of house staff who are now not happy that they're having to share it. I would say that. I think from an operator perspective, the complexities come around pooling tips across multi-site operators, where people have forgotten that they can't do that anymore, and that's the change they're working through. This is going to be looked at again. We're hopeful to make some changes, and the big thing that I'm pushing for is a bit what's happening in the States. Don't tax it if it's coming through an employee's payroll, and if they are earning it and it is being clearly earned and passed through, they should be allowed to count it as earnings.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's a session coming up later, isn't there, on it? So you can get some more detail later. But I just want to, there's the issue around agency staff as well, including them in tips. Obviously, that's quite a big thing for hotel operators.
Yes, and predominantly that is the choice of the operator, again, in discussion with staff, but it's about clarity and transparency. But as employers, we can choose to include or exclude agency staff, and I think the guidance is very clear that if somebody is effectively working for you very long period of time and is in the same state as a permanent employee, that leads you to think that should be included. But if they're genuinely temporary agency staff, then they can be excluded. And the key is to have dialogue with your permanent members of staff, because if the staff are in agreement with something that you're wanting to do, this legislation basically allows you to run with what the staff want.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And as I said, we cover a lot of ground, but where do you see, some of it's not so positive. Where do you see the kind of silver linings for the sector? Where do you look for optimism?
There is a big piece of white space that is in the government's agenda. They've set out this government by strategy, an industrial strategy, a trade strategy, an investment strategy, a high street strategy, a small business strategy, all of which talk about growth and regeneration of the high street and 80% employment. And you don't get the first or the last unless you've got us, and we are critical from the hotel space as well on high street regeneration. So the aspiration that government has is quite clear, and they talk lots of warm words about how important we are and how vital we are as the foundation and everyday economy and the enabler of growth. There's something there that we can exploit, but it won't come through until about 2 to 3 years' time, I would suspect. But that's what's going to drive the big reforms on planning, grid connectivity, which is a really critical one, infrastructure, IT, phones, all of those kind of things that we rely upon as businesses. In the short term, they realise they've given us a big kick, and they realise there's a misstep here, because there's a complete disconnect between you saying hotels are marvellous because they generate a lot of tourism income, and then giving us a hit that means we can't do anything. So they have said they want to throw the kitchen sink at growth in our sector for the next 12 to 18 months. That gives us an opportunity to say to them, hang on a minute, the employment law isn't right, needs changing, you've got to look at something that is sector specific, to look at business rates reform and get it right, and to push back against some of those unnecessary costs of doing business, like smoking bans for hotel guests, alcohol restrictions, food charges, coffee cup taxes, tourism taxes and bed taxes. There's a lot we can use to say, hang on a minute, we're already paying our way in NIs, you can't come back to us for a bed tax.
And are we being listened to in that front? I mean, there's quite a few things in that kitchen sink, aren't
there? There's a lot in the kitchen sink. There's a lot that we're throwing at them.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Right, at that point, I'll open it up to some questions then, if anyone has anything from Kate.
We have one straight away.
up there.
Yeah. Thank you. Kate, firstly, thanks for all you're doing for all of our sector. We're very appreciative. As a mother of a disabled young person working in hospitality for 24 hours a week, is there not an argument that their new NI charges are actually discrimination? Because if I was an employer and I had somebody like my son working, and he can't work more than 24 hours a week, and I wouldn't be encouraged to take on any more people on part-time basis who, apart from the people who we've talked caring for other people, etc., they're often the opportunities for people with disabilities. And surely that cannot be correct, that they are actually seeking to discriminate against employing disabled people, which in my opinion, this will happen, because if you can employ a full-time person for the same NI as my son who's 24 hours a week, as an employer with every penny counts, you're going to stop doing it. So that
I think you're right. Unfortunately, it is those job opportunities for the most vulnerable in society that are going to get restricted, that are going to be the first to go. Not necessarily that we'll cut jobs in those areas, but if you're looking at recruitment and you're looking at providing those opportunities, yes, similarly, you're going to think twice about somebody who's 18 to 20 or 21 to 24. All of those costs come up. We have put that forward as one of the solutions as well. If you've got this exemption from NIs for under 21s, for 18 to 24-year-olds who are on an apprenticeship, can you also look at doing it for new entrants to the market where you are taking on people in protected characteristics?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Got another question? Just a hand up, that's all you need. Rare opportunity. Yes, I'm rushing to somebody on the left side of the room, James. relative to you. In fact, we can't all see you from here. You're lurking behind that lectern.
Thanks. Hi, Kate. It's Jim from Barclays.
Hi.
I want to reiterate the point that our colleague just made around the support for the sector. Thank you. In conversation with some of my clients, they've been meeting the local MPs, and the local Labour MPs seem somewhat surprised around the impact that some of the changes that have been made have been seen. What are you kind of hearing in your discussions more generally? Is it landed how they expected it to, or not?
No, it hasn't landed how they've expected it to, and it hasn't landed how they were briefed by the centre of government that it was going to land. I mean, if you've got a large number of brand new MPs, which is what this government's got, you do rely upon centralised briefings to come down to them. They all get their lines to take. They all get the information about why this is not so problematic. And they were just totally blindsided by the impact that it was having with the change in the NI threshold. And it's that bit that they just hadn't clocked, didn't understand why that would be so problematic. I had lots of them saying to me, but it's just the same as income tax. There's a lower rate and it kicks in and it's cumulative, and as you go further forward, don't understand it. So I think there is an opportunity there. I think, you know, my final plea to everybody in the room would be, we've done a lot of stuff you might have seen at the weekend, and apologies for anybody's breakfast that I kept interrupting by being on the Today programme talking about the doom and gloom. We've put a letter together to the Chancellor which puts forward some solutions to try and get them out of the bind. We know that lots of backbench MPs are really concerned about this but don't understand it. On our website, you've got a copy of that letter, you've got a template letter that you can send from the outlets to the local MP to ask them to raise the issue with Rachel Reeves. This is going to be a weight of postbags issue. They've already called us to say, can we try and calm down the noise? Can we stop the campaigning? Can we stop talking about it in the media? No. We're going to keep going because it's really important, but we need everybody else in the industry to start doing that as well. We've also got a portal where people can give us their practical examples. So if it does mean you're going to not take on an apprentice, or you're going to cut hours, or you're going to close for a certain number of days, please feed that in as well. It'll all be anonymous, but we'll just use it as case studies and we'll link up to the local backbench MPs. But it is going to require weight of numbers, so please use those tools, write to your MP, highlight the pain and make it real to them as to what it means for real people in real jobs.
Great. Well, thank you for the question. It looks like we'll have to wrap it up there, but thank you very much for those insights, Kate Nicholls.
Thank you, Kate Nicholls. I don't know how you managed to hold so much data in your head, not a note in front of you. Incredible. And James, I apologise for not comparing you with James Bond earlier. It never occurred to me, to be honest with you.